Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of the newspaper analysis. So today we are going to discuss The Hindu Daily Edition dated 4th December 2021. The topics to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and the time stamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So moving on to our next topic that has appeared on page number 12. The topic is in relation to the recent cyclone which has developed in the Bay of Bengal region and has hit the India's east coast in the states of Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. This cyclone has been called as Jawad, Jawad, and this topic has come in the context that recently Indian Meteorological Department, that is IMD, said that the cyclone will briefly gain in the strength and become a severe cyclonic storm. Now what do we technically mean by this thing that is severe cyclonic storm, we will understand in this today's session. The IMD has classified the tropical cyclones on the basis of wind speed in many categories, and one of those categories is the severe cyclonic storm. As far as UPSC syllabus is concerned, this topic falls under two subjects, that is General Studies Paper 1 in the section of Geography and the micro section of important geophysical phenomena which explicitly mentions cyclone. And the second paper, that is General Studies Paper 3, the topic explicitly mentions disaster management because we know that cyclones are one of the biggest disasters which India and the world face. And that is why to manage those disasters is an important component. Now the importance of this topic can also be assessed through the regular questions which have been asked in UPSC time to time. For example, in UPSC 2014, the question was asked that tropical cyclones are largely confined to South China Sea, Bay of Bengal and Gulf of Mexico. Why? So to answer this particular question, you need to be aware about the developmental conditions which form a tropical cyclones. This section will also be dealt in detail in today's discussion. And the previous year 2013 UPSC asked another question that the recent cyclone on the east coast of India was called Phelan. How are the tropical cyclones named across the world? So this question is based on the nomenclature of the tropical cyclones, that how the tropical cyclones are named across the world. So in today's session we will track the path which recent cyclone Jawad has taken. Then we will discuss the concept of the cyclone with the help of the structure which a tropical cyclone develops. Further, we will come to the nomenclature of the tropical cyclones and some examples related to this nomenclature. And in the end, we will assess the damages associated with tropical cyclones and the measures which can be taken in order to deal with such disaster. So first of all, we will assess this picture. This is the Bay of Bengal region. And because now we are facing a winter season, that means we are in a retreating monsoon phase whereby the winds move in this direction. We have northeasterly winds. For example, in this picture you have an animation of the direction of the winds in the Bay of Bengal region in present times. As you can see, the wind is coming from the northeasterly direction and is going towards the southwest. So that means the direction of the wind is northeast to the southwest. So you must have heard about the concept of the retreating monsoon which Indian mainland faces in the months of December and January. That is why in the Arabian Sea also we have the winds northeasterly in direction. However, an important point is that the direction of this cyclone Jawad is contrary to the direction of the winds in this region because the cyclone is moving in this direction. And IMD has told us that this cyclone will move from the state of Andhra Pradesh towards the state of Odisha. And going by the present details given by IMD, this cyclone has already hit the coast of Andhra Pradesh and is moving towards the northern part, that is Odisha. However, in addition to this, we need to understand the concept of the cyclones, its structure, conditions, classification, everything will be dealt under this topic. So first of all, you need to understand that what exactly the cyclones are. The cyclones are the low pressure areas which are in turn created because of high intense insolation. And that is why these cyclones are primarily found in tropical regions. What happens is, suppose this is an ocean surface comprising water and the sun is directly heating the surface of these oceans. Now what happens is that the air parcel just above this area will be heated, and as we know that the warm air is lighter in nature, and that is why the warm air will rise up. So now because the air from this area has risen up, this area becomes a low pressure area. And then the cause and effect relationship develops where the wind continuously rises in the upward direction from this particular area. And now because we all know that the movement of the wind is from high pressure to low pressure, that is why this particular area will attract the winds from all the directions. Now what will happen is, suppose this is a low pressure area and it is attracting the wind from all the directions. But as you will diverge from this central location, the pressure will rise. So what will happen is, suppose this is, I am having 998 millibar of pressure, this will be 1000 millibar of pressure, and this will be 1002 millibar of pressure. So as you can see, the pressure is rising as we move outwards from this center. And that is why the winds from the outer area is converging towards this central point. And hence the pattern of the winds becomes circular in nature because the isobars are closed. As you can see here, we have a complete circle of isobars. Those who don't know that what are isobars, let me tell you that isobars are imaginary lines which join the points having equal pressure. So this means that if we are, for example, talking about this isobar, that is this line, so at every point on this particular line, we will be having the pressure of 1002 millibar. This is what is known as isobar. Similarly, at every point on this particular line, we'll be having 998 millibar of pressure. So now because this area is having a very low pressure, the wind will rise in upward direction. And then it will be affected by the Coriolis force. We will discuss this Coriolis force later. But first here you need to understand that the cyclones are the low pressure area having circular pattern of winds characterized by closed isobars. Now if you see this particular diagram, we have an eye in the center. The central portion of the cyclone is called as eye. And this is a rough structure of a tropical cyclone whereby the winds are rising in this direction and they are moving outwards. Now you need to understand that what are the prerequisite conditions which are necessary in order to form a full-fledged tropical cyclones. The first and the foremost condition is the warm oceans. The surface temperature of the ocean body should be greater than 27 degrees Celsius in order to act like a heat engine, because tropical cyclones act like heat engine, and that is why they require a very warm mass of water. The second important thing is that these tropical cyclones require abundant and continuous supply of moisture, and that is why these cyclones do not originate over the land. So the tropical cyclones will always be originated in the ocean body, and as soon as they will enter the landmass, they will die out. The third important condition is the Coriolis force. Basically, Coriolis is technically not a force, but it is a deflection which is caused due to movement of the earth. Now suppose this is our earth, and we all know that earth move in this direction. The earth moves from west to east, and as the earth will move, it will deflect the moving object in some direction. Now that direction is towards the right in the northern hemisphere and towards the left in the southern hemisphere. Now if we apply this Coriolis force, let's say on this diagram, what will happen? Now because we are talking about the cyclones in Bay of Bengal that lies in the northern hemisphere region, let us understand that how the Coriolis force will change the direction of the motion of the winds in a tropical cyclone. Now suppose this is our cyclone which has originated in the Bay of Bengal, and as we have learned that the Coriolis force will deflect the moving body in right direction in the northern hemisphere, so that means that all these winds will be deflected towards their right, which means this will be deflected in this direction, this wind will be deflected towards this will be deflected towards this in this fashion. So all the incoming wind towards the central point will be deflected towards their own right. And if you closely observe this phenomena, the overall direction which you are getting for the wind is in this direction. And this is anti-clockwise motion. That is why we say that tropical cyclones move in anti-clockwise direction in the northern hemisphere. And as you can also observe that Coriolis force is the sole force which will be responsible for the rotating winds, and we know that in cyclones the winds are rotating in nature. That is why the Coriolis force is one of the conditions in order to form cyclones. If there are no Coriolis force, there will be no rotation and there will be no cyclone. And the last important condition is the upper divergence. Now if you again closely look this diagram, this is the low pressure region. And here the wind were converging as we have discussed. But from this area, as soon as the wind is rising in the upper atmosphere, it is diverging from this central point. That is why we say that the upper air divergence is also essential, because this upper air divergence will in turn lead to pressure differences in this region and this region, and this pressure difference will in turn energize the cyclone, because this will be responsible for the movement of wind in the vertical frame. Now coming to the important characteristics of tropical cyclones. The first characteristic we have already discussed, that they move anti-clockwise in northern hemisphere and vice versa, that is clockwise in the southern hemisphere. The second, we have also discussed that these cyclones die on reaching the land surface, because these cyclones require continuous supply of moisture, and once they reach the land topography which is dry in nature, that continuous supply of moisture is being cut and the tropical cyclones do not get the required energy in order to sustain themselves. That is why they die on land. And the third peculiar characteristic which is relevant in the context of India is that the frequency and intensity of the cyclones in Bay of Bengal is higher than the Arabian Sea. On an average, it is estimated that the ratio is 4:1. That is, in 1 year, Bay of Bengal experiences around 4 cyclones and Arabian Sea experiences 1 cyclone. However, you might have read that in recent times, because of the climate change, this difference is getting lowered and the frequency as well as the intensity of the cyclones originating in the Arabian Sea are also rising. Now we will move on towards the IMD classification which it has made in order to classify the tropical cyclones on the basis of the wind speed. Now IMD classifies tropical cyclones in 6 categories, ranging from the low pressure disturbance to the super cyclone. The wind speed in the low pressure region is less than 31 km per hour. However, the wind speed in a full developed mature super cyclone crosses 221 km per hour. Now, as far as this Jawad cyclone is concerned, it is as of now classified as deep depression, that is DD. Now we come to the naming of these tropical cyclones, that what procedure is adopted while naming these tropical cyclones and which body is responsible for their naming. So this nomenclature is set on the specified criteria and procedures which we are going to discuss now. Now across the world, various regions are divided under regional specified meteorological centers, that is RSMCs, and the tropical cyclone warning centers, that is TCWC. So across the world there are 6 RSMCs and 5 TCWCs. Out of the global 6 RSMC, the one RSMC is the Indian Meteorological Department, which is the overall body in the context of cyclones, especially in the Indian Ocean region. And that is why the IMD names the cyclones developing over the North Indian Ocean, including the Bay of Bengal as well as the Arabian Sea. Now there are 13 countries in this specific region and each country has provided 13 names. So that means total we already have 169 names of tropical cyclones. So whenever a cyclone originates in the North Indian Ocean region, the name is given on the basis of this list sequentially. For example, if the cyclone is named as A, then the next cyclone will be named as B, then the next cyclone will be named as C. We will look at some of the names of these cyclones which are there in the list later. However, the countries are not absolutely free to decide whatever name they want. There are specific guidelines in order to ensure that these names are neutral in nature. So now let us look at the guidelines. First, it says that the proposed name should be neutral to politics and political figures, religious beliefs, cultures, and gender. Second, it says in line with the first statement only that the name should be chosen in such a way that it does not hurt the sentiments of any group of population over the globe. It should not be rude or cruel in nature. It should be short and easy to pronounce and should not be offensive to any member. And because the name is to be short, the maximum length of the name will be 8 letters. This is done in order to generate the awareness among masses, because earlier when there were technical names, the common masses were not able to understand the meaning of those names, and that is why it was one of the biggest obstacle in generating the awareness as well as the rescue operations in cyclonic disasters. So that is why now the guidelines have been formed in order to have a short and easy to pronounce names. Next, it says that the proposed name should be provided with its pronunciation and voice over also. And the last, it says that the names of the tropical cyclones over the North Indian Ocean will not be repeated. Once used, it will cease to be used again. Thus, every time the name should be new. Now, these are the examples of few names which are given by each country in the Indian Ocean region. For example, this Jawad, Jawad. Few years back, you might have heard about the names of cyclones Gati, Nisarga, Nivar. So this is a list which is already being provided by the countries, and name of the cyclones are kept as per this list. Now we will try to analyze the cyclone as a disaster. So this picture shows the associated damages which a tropical cyclone can create. First, it can lead to flooding of the coastal areas, it can erode the beaches, and can also lead to loss of soil fertility, because the tropical cyclones bring with itself the saline water of the oceans, and that water intrudes the land masses, which in turn increases the salinity of that particular land patch. Next, because of the high velocity and momentum of those winds, there is a huge scale damage to the existing structures like building, communication lines, infrastructure, transport arteries, etc. In similar fashion, there is a loss of power and communication. And we all know that there is a large scale loss of life and property, including the livestock. Further, the water supply system gets contaminated, and because of the excessive rain, there are chances of land subsidence and flooding of the inland area as well. So, in order to minimize the loss of life and property, we need to take such measures. First, we need to have a robust early warning system in order to disseminate the information within time. Now, this early warning system is primarily built to achieve two objectives. The first is to ensure the emergency response system, and the other is to assess the impact of any tropical cyclone in order to design the rescue operations needed in that particular affected region. The second important thing is that the government and administration should ensure that the communication and dissemination of information should be smooth enough in order to provide all the relevant information as well as material to the people affected in a particular region. And that is why the network lines, that is telecommunication network lines as well as infrastructure network lines, should be strengthened, and in case they have been damaged, they should be repaired as early as possible. The third thing is that the administration should also go for the structural measures. And in this sense, saline embankments can be made, cyclone shelters can be established, and the lining of canals and the cleaning of drains can be an important step towards reducing the loss of life and property in such a scenario. Because tropical cyclones are always accompanied with high intensity rainfall. And if we have adequate number of canals, if our drains are cleaned enough, we can divert and transport the surplus water from our streets towards these canals and drains, which in turn will reduce the chances of flooding of our cities and villages. The next important thing is that there should be a specific plan for the coastal zones, because as we have discussed that tropical cyclones hit the coast and they die as soon as they reach the land. So that is why the coastal areas are most vulnerable to these tropical cyclones. And in order to prevent the shock of these tropical cyclones, mangroves, shelter belts, and floodplain management in the coastal areas is the best possible strategy to reduce the impact of these cyclones. And last but not the least is the step in context of the common masses, that is the awareness generation. So in this sense, people need to be aware and they should be provided with the basic information that what they need to do, what they don't need to do as soon as the cyclone hits their area. Because it is said that community is always the first responder in case of any emergency situation. And so is the importance of the community of that particular area which is affected by some disasters, including the tropical cyclones. Now, summing up this entire topic once again. This topic has appeared on page number 12 in the context of the recent cyclone which is named Jawar, which has originated in the Bay of Bengal area and is heading towards the India's east coast. IMD has predicted the track of the cyclone in such fashion that it will first strike the Andhra coast and then it will move towards the coast of Odisha. Then we analyze the structure of the tropical cyclone, whose central low pressure area is called I, and this is surrounded by the uplifting air from the circumference, and on reaching the upper atmosphere these winds diverge. Then we discuss the concept of the cyclone, that these are the low pressure areas having circular winds, having closed isobars, and the warm oceans, abundant moisture, Coriolis force, and upper divergence is the necessary condition for the formation of tropical cyclones. Then we discuss the six-fold classification of the IMD on the basis of the wind speed of tropical cyclones and how these cyclones are technically differentiated on this basis. Then we discussed in detail about the nomenclature and the procedure followed for naming the tropical cyclones across the world, especially in the context of India, with the help of these names which are provided already by the Indian Ocean Rim countries. And in the last, we discussed the cyclone as a disaster and what potential disasters it can create, which can lead to loss of life and property, and then what measures can we take in order to reduce and minimize the damage to life and property. So moving to the next topic that has appeared on page number 8 as a lead article in today's newspaper. So this topic has appeared in the context of recently concluded COP26 in the Glasgow and the upcoming COP27 in the Egypt. Now this article gives you a very good perspective linking the climate change and the food security threats across the world. And that is why this topic comes under the General Studies Paper 3, which has the interlinking of economic development, environment, and disaster management. This GS paper 3 also specifically talks about the food security. And that is why this perspective becomes very important, because now it is interlinking two subsections of one particular paper, that is environment and food security. So now let us imagine that in the mains paper you get the question that you have to discuss the impacts of climate change on food security. Or I change the wording of this question, that in today's scenario the climate change is not affecting only the biodiversity, but it has also created a question mark on the very survival of the human species, because it affects the most important human need, that is food. So in your opinion, how does a climate change impact the food supplies or the food availability across the world? So to deal with this particular question, this session is very important. In this session, we will analyze the impact of the climate change as well as the strategy in order to tackle that climate change. Now here I also have another important objective, that not just to provide you with the content, I also want you to think about the dimensions, the line of thought which you should be taking care while writing an answer. Suppose the question is asking on the impact of the climate change on food security. Just think about all the stages which are there in food security. Primarily, there are three stages in the food system. The first stage is the production, the second stage is the distribution of that thing which has been produced, And the third thing is the consumption of that thing which has been produced and distributed to the end consumer. So now your half job is done. Now you just have to analyze the impact of the climate change on all these three dimensions, that how climate change is hampering or altering the production, distribution and consumption of the food products. We will analyze these things one by one. First come to production. We know that climate change has led to severe climatic disasters, as well as because of the recent global warming phenomena, the tropical diseases are rising. There has been a significant increase in the number of pesticides and insecticides, which in turn has led to plant diseases. And these plant diseases, in addition to the disasters, are responsible for the crop failures across the world. So the climate change is directly reducing the production of the primary articles, that is the crops. Second, we all know that climate change is one of the important factors behind the global water scarcity. Now, there have been projections that there might be international conflicts on the basis of the water sharing, which many experts have called as the probability of water wars. Even in India, we witness that many areas are becoming water scarce and water stressed. So there is a direct analogy. If we are not having enough water, we will not be irrigating our fields, which in turn will reduce the production. And similarly, now because we are not having the crops, the livestock will not be having the nutritious diet and their productivity will also be reduced. So that means that the crop plus livestock both will be affected and their productivity will be diminished. Now come to the distribution phase. Now we know that the climatic disasters are the biggest reasons behind the supply chain disruptions. Now just imagine that despite the fact that we have adequate production of the crops which we eat, if we are not able to distribute those crops to those regions which seriously requires them, then there is bound to be a food insecurity in that particular area. For example, let's say that Punjab and Haryana are growing wheat and that has to be transported to the Saharan region in Africa. Now Punjab and Haryana grows adequate amount of wheat. But if the supply chains are not there, that wheat will not be transported on time to the Saharan countries, and Saharan countries in turn will face food insecurity. And that is why many of the countries in Sahara still face the threat of famines. So now because climate change is hampering the supply chains, which in turn will affect the distribution, which in turn will affect the food security. And then come to the third stage, that is consumption. Now because we are not having proper supply, because our crops have failed, that means there is a supply side constraint. And we know by a common understanding that whenever there is a supply side constraint and demand outpaces the supply, there is a condition of inflation. Now, if there is an inflation, the poor and the vulnerable section of the society will not be able to purchase the food. And we all know that affordability is one of the biggest component to ensure food security. If we have food, if that food has been distributed in the areas where they had to be, still there is a condition that there will be food insecurity because people will not be able to purchase that food. The second thing is that World Food Programs as well as the IPCC has said that because of the climate change there will be reduced diversity in the food basket. Now people will be eating similar types of diets across the regions, and because of this reduced diversity they might suffer nutritional imbalance in their bodies. And in this line we have this important point that there can be a lack in nutrition. Always remember that the food security has two important dimensions in it. It is not just about adequate quantity, but it is also about quality. And that is where the nutrition comes into play. Even if the specific section of the society is getting affordable, reliable food in terms of quantity, even then they might face food insecurity because they are not receiving the quality food. And because the climate change has a direct bearing on the nutrition of the crops and the vegetation, hence climate change has a direct bearing on the food security also. Next important thing is the impact on vulnerables, which we have already discussed in the context of inflation. Because when the climate change takes place, it is not the rich but the poor who most suffer. And that is why the food security of the vulnerable sections will be at a huge threat. And last but not the least is the impact of climate change on the employment. Now, just imagine the sections which are dependent on agriculture, fisheries, etc. for their employment and their livelihood. Because the climate change is reducing the possibility and the potential of these primary activities, their livelihood will be threatened. And if the livelihood of people are threatened, they will not earn, they will not buy quality food, and the overall situation of the food security will be detrimental for that specific section of society. If you have understood these factors, now is the time to analyze the spatial food security threat across the world. Now, suppose this is a rough world map. The most insecure food regions, according to the World Food Programme and the SOFI report, are the Saharan countries and few patches in West Asia. Then comes the South Asian region, but in South Asia, the quantity of food is not an important problem. Here, the problem is of quality of food. Here, we have an issue of nutrition. Here, we have an issue of quantity. Further, it is also estimated that the coastal regions of Africa, South America, and India are the future hotspots of food insecurity because these areas are under the threat of submergence in the backdrop of rising sea level because of climate change. So, that is why these particular regions should be taken care of. Now we need to understand that what future strategy should we adopt? What should we do in order to have a sustainable food supplies and to minimize the threat of food insecurity? The first important step is that the policies should be made to ensure resilient livelihoods. Now this point is self-explanatory because if the people are having resilient livelihoods, they will be having reliable and sustainable income, and this in turn will help them to achieve the quality as well as the quantity of the food. The second important thing is that the policies should be made in order to promote those food crops which are climate resilient. For example, millets. Now, millets are also the climate resilient crop as well as they are a source of high nutrition. So, such crops serve our both purposes. The third important thing is that the policies should be made in order to empower the women. Their decision making capacity should be increased because it has been witnessed across the world. Whichever nations have invested in their women empowerment, their social indicators have risen dramatically. For example, in Brazil, there was a program Bolsa Familia, whereby a specific focus was made on the women, and the result is that they have achieved better indicators in social sector, especially in the education and health. The fourth thing is that steps should be taken in order to promote resilient agriculture, and there are three important pillars for this. The first is that access to finance should be ensured, and here comes the role of the formal financial institutions, that is, the banks. The third is that the farmers should be given timely information related to the climate change in order to select the crops which they need to grow. Further, they should also be given the information in case of any future climatic disasters which is going to hit their area so that they can take timely steps in order to prevent their crop losses. And the third is the innovation in technology. We should invest in such technology which is resilient to climate, which is there to ensure resilient supply chains, and which are climate friendly in nature. For example, micro irrigation techniques, that is, the sprinkler irrigation and drip irrigation, are very handy in this context. Next important thing is that the global community should take steps in order to ensure climate financing. We all know that developed countries promise to supply funds to developing countries, but still these funds have not been transferred. And therefore, developing countries are continuously trying to pressurize the developed economies to transfer the finances which they promised. And in this very line, there is an important role of the multilateral institutions, for example, World Bank, UNDP, and World Food Programs. And the last step comes of civil society and the government. The civil society and government should join hands. They should frame efficient policies taking all the stakeholders into account so that the real objectives can be attained. In order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, it is required that all the stakeholders should come together and frame policies. Now, summing up the entire topic in brief again, this topic has appeared on page number 8 in the context of the climate change and its impact on food security. Now, here we learned that how climate change impacts all the three stages of the food system, that is production, distribution, and consumption. Now, here with the help of a rough map, we analyze the most vulnerable regions across the world which face the threat of food insecurity in terms of quantity as well as quality. And in the end, we discuss certain steps which should be taken in order to ensure reliable and sustainable food availability across the world, across the sections, and across the societies. Moving on with our next topic that has appeared on page number 8. Now, this topic is in context of the NIRF rankings, which stand for National Institutional Ranking Framework. Now, this framework was designed by the HRD Ministry in order to rank the higher education institutions in India. Under this framework, colleges and universities from medical, engineering, as well as humanities backgrounds are ranked on the basis of multiple parameters. So, this article talks about the fact that it is not desirable to compare the central and national higher education institutions with state public universities under the National Institutional Ranking Framework. Now, the context of this topic attracts our mind towards an important sector in our country, that is the higher education institutions. And this sector is also one of the very favorite areas in UPSC. For example, in mains examination 2015, UPSC asked this question: the quality of higher education in India requires major improvements to make it internationally competitive. Do you think that the entry of foreign educational institutions would help improve the quality of higher and technical education in this country? Discuss. Now, as far as this question is concerned, the context of this question is in relation to the entry of foreign education institutions. But this question also makes us believe that higher education institutions are important from the examination point of view, and therefore we need to analyze the challenges as well as way ahead for higher education institutions. First of all, we need to address the state-based higher education institutions because the context has compared the state public universities with the national higher education institutions. So there are some feathers in the state HEIs. That means that there are some positives associated with the state-based higher education institutions. The first important point is that the share of the PhD in the state university is highest, and these universities are also responsible for a greater share of women participation. The data suggests that share of the female, that is 49%, is much higher in the state universities and HEIs than the central universities or the HEIs. Similarly, because these higher education institutions are localized within a specific region, that is why these institutions are more attached to the localized learning and local culture. And moreover, they also contribute to the labor force of India itself. Because on one hand, many of the graduates and postgraduates from the national higher education institutions opt for the higher studies in some other countries or apply for the jobs in some other countries. On the other hand, the pass out of these institutions, that is the state-based universities, are mostly working in India itself. But there are certain issues which the state universities face. The first is the inadequate financial support that is provided by the state governments. These universities most of the time face financial crunch. And that is why the salaries and the pension liabilities are barely managed in these universities. Further, there is no dedicated agency that carries out the cost benefit analysis of these universities, and that is why this article says that the NIRF ranking disallows a level playing field to state universities and colleges. That is why this article says that it is not desirable to compare the central as well as state universities on same parameters because both the universities face their unique challenges. Next important thing is that most of the state universities are in rural areas which hinder their accessibility to the main urban clusters. Further, the teaching level, the resources, learning, research, and professional indicators of state universities are not up to that mark as compared to the national universities, and these universities also face a depleting strength of the teaching staff. Now, these challenges require certain strategy, a certain way ahead, which we can write in our answers. So, in this context, government came up with an important policy, that is National Education Policy 2019. And this policy calls for fundamentally restructuring the country's higher education system. The policy seeks to boost India's research capability, doubling the gross enrollment ratio from 25 to 50% by 2035 and substantially increasing the expenditures on public education, which currently accounts for 10% of all government spending. Further, it also revives a long stalled idea of inviting top ranked foreign universities to operate in India and suggests the legislations that will be introduced to this effect. The policy also calls for all the higher education institutions to evolve into one of the three types of multidisciplinary institutions, that is, research university, teaching university, or the colleges. And finally, this policy also calls for building research capacities at all institutions and establishment of a dedicated body, that is National Research Foundation. So if these policies are implemented in letter and spirit, all the challenges which we discussed in the state universities and the other higher education institutions, we expect these challenges can be easily overcome, and this will further allow India to reap its real demographic dividend. So now is the time for the question of the day. The question asked in yesterday's DNS was related to Paika rebellion. The question asked, which of the following is correct about the Paika rebellion? The statement 1 says that it was a rebellion against the British in the state of Odisha. Yes, this statement is correct. And the second statement says that this rebellion took place during the revolt of 1857. Now this statement is incorrect, and that is why the answer is A. So today's QOD is in relation to the tropical cyclones. Consider the following statements. The statement 1 says that the tropical cyclones move anti-clockwise in northern hemisphere, and the statement 2 says that they are most found in equatorial regions because of maximum availability of heat and water. You have to find the correct statements among these two statements.